In this video, you'll discover the top foods that are spiking your blood sugar and causing you to have insulin resistance. Hey Wellness Warrior, it's Dr. Zyrowski, and the glycemic index is used to classify foods that contain carbohydrates, their potential for raising your blood sugar, and how quickly they raise your blood sugar as well. Simple carbohydrates like sugars found in sodas and sweet desserts are broken down way faster than more complex carbohydrates that are found in vegetables and also healthier carb sources. Now, as a result of that, your blood sugar spikes when you consume these poor quality carb sources, and then it will fall rapidly. It is believed by many doctors that insulin resistance is not only brought about by having high blood sugar for extended periods of time, but also having a constant sugar spike and dip from high glycemic foods that play an enormous role as to whether or not you have insulin resistance. Now, to determine glycemic index numbers, doctors observe how healthy people's blood sugar levels change after ingesting carb-containing foods by measuring the blood sugar levels and comparing it to the baseline. They determine where a food falls on a scale from 0 to 100, where 100 would basically represent pure sugar and 0 is going to represent foods with no sugar at all. The glycemic index does a pretty good job in showing us how our bodies respond to the same amount of carbohydrates coming from different sources. Now, for instance would be, how does your body respond to like a cup of oatmeal versus a cup of bananas? So let's take a look at the worst high glycemic foods that are spiking your blood sugar, but first, a word from our sponsor. Are you sitting at a desk all day that is not ergonomically correct for you and is destroying your spine? It's time to put an end to your poor ergonomics and build yourself a legit workstation. This is why you need the FlexiSpot Pro Plus Standing Desk E7. The E7's LCD keypad panel takes your experience to the next level. Apart from the programmable memory presets, there is a USB port on the side of the keypad to charge your devices conveniently. The E7 is highly durable and uses state-of-the-art smart technology. When encountering any objects while lifting and lowering, the E7 will bounce back a bit before coming to a stop to protect your stuff from crashing. In a nutshell, the E7's sleek design and supreme quality make it the optimal choice for building a home office. So keep an eye out for FlexiSpot's member days for promos and deals to score incredible discounts. You can also use my link in the description to get $30 off when you purchase your new desk. Check out the link in the description below to order your new standing desk today. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the high glycemic foods that are going to cause insulin resistance if you're consuming them frequently. And first, we're gonna look at one that you may think is pretty obvious, but it's going to be sugary drinks. And here's where it's not so obvious, because when you look at fruit juice and iced tea and soda and energy drinks and sport drinks, they pretty much all have the glycemic index of 60, right? Now, to give you some context again, 100 is pure white sugar, and 0 is a food that contains no sugar at all. That means that it's doing nothing to your blood glucose, right? So with sugary drinks being at 60, then we have to make sure that we're watching out for this, okay? Because whether you have juice or you have soda, it pretty much is doing the same thing to your blood sugar. Now, I know the argument will be made, well, Dr. Zyrowski, juice has all these nutrients in it and soda is just junk. I understand that argument, but the reality is that when it comes to glycemic index, when it comes to insulin resistance and raising your blood sugar, this number actually matters quite a bit. So we have to make sure we're watching out for that. Now, the next thing on our list is going to be white flour, okay? White flour has all the healthiest parts of the wheat. If you want to argue that there's a healthy part of wheat, it has all the healthiest parts of wheat stripped away from it, like the fiber and the nutrients, they're completely stripped away. So we have to make sure we're watching out for things like donuts, white bread, pasta, bagels, pretty much all the things that contain that white flour, because it has a glycemic index of 75. It is going to skyrocket your blood sugar. And we also want to make sure we're watching out for breakfast food, because I mentioned bagels, like cereals, like cornflakes, for instance. Cornflakes has a glycemic index of 81. Like, that is literally about as close to just plain old sugar as you can get. You might as well eat sugar at that point. So make sure you're avoiding that. Now, the next thing on our list, the next high glycemic food that we want to watch out for is rice, because white rice has a glycemic index of 78 and brown rice is at 63. So what does that tell us? That tells us that whether it's white rice or brown rice, rice is not good for you if you are trying to get your blood sugar under control. And you know what's actually even worse, and I want to point this out because a lot of people are turning to like rice cakes and rice crackers and all of these different foods that contain a lot of rice. Those will have a glycemic index on average right around 87. Okay, that's huge. That's pretty much right up there with those corn flakes. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding those as well. Now, I also want to mention store-bought salad dressings, okay? And this is important because when you look at salad dressings, many people think, well, if I'm eating a salad, it's healthy, so I'll put the dressing on it and you know what, it tastes better. But the reality is that these salad dressings typically will have the fat stripped away from them and they're loaded with tons of sugar, like high fructose corn syrup. So we want to make sure that we're not ruining our whole healthy experience by eating a salad full of really bad dressings. So I want to point out that many salad dressings are high glycemic, and we want to make sure we avoid those. So read your labels and watch out for that. Now let's take a look at non-dairy milk. Now in my house, we avoid dairy milk because it does not sit well with us. And what we do in return is look for alternatives. But we have to be careful with that because many of these milk alternatives are not particularly great. Let me give you an example. Oat milk, which many people love, has a glycemic index of 105. So if you've ever used oat milk and are like, wow, I feel really bloated and not so great, there's a reason for that. Huge glycemic index. Now, also rice milk is terrible too with a glycemic index of 86. Okay, so if you're avoiding dairy milk, just know that these other alternative sources aren't particularly well, specifically oat milk and rice milk. Now let's look to something that's considered to be healthy by most people, and that's oatmeal, okay? Instant oatmeal is terrible for you. It has a glycemic index of 80. As a reminder, plain old sugar is 100 and no sugar is 0. So instant oatmeal is falling in at 80. Popcorn is at 65. We want to avoid that whenever possible. I mean, sure, everybody's gonna love to have a bowl of popcorn here and there, but it's gonna be a high glycemic food. And specifically, you wanna watch out for it if you're struggling with insulin resistance. For instance, I had someone I was working with, and they had the blood glucose monitor on their shoulder, and they were watching their blood sugar because they have type 2 diabetes. And what did they tell me that they love to have every night? It was popcorn. I was like, have you ever watched your blood glucose monitor when you're eating that popcorn? And of course the answer was no. They kind of turned a blind eye to it. But anyway, watch out for popcorn. On the list next is potatoes with a glycemic index of 79, and that specifically is white potatoes, okay? So once again, potatoes have a lot of nutritional benefits to them, but they're gonna be a high glycemic starchy food. Now let's take a look at two different fruits, okay? Because when you're looking at fruit, you want to stay away from the high glycemic stuff, especially if you have insulin resistance or if you're just a good healthy individual, you don't want to be eating it all the time. So watermelon has a glycemic index of 76 and pineapple of 66, okay? This is quite high, so let's make sure that we aren't overdoing it. And in general, if you're consuming these two fruits, think of consuming them at a time when you're outside, it's a hot day, maybe you're running around with the kids, that's a good time, but not like if you're sitting at a desk and stationary and not doing anything, right? Next on our list is going to be plain old white table sugar, and that is at 100 for the glycemic index. Now, the reason I mention that is because if you are somebody who, for instance, goes out and you wanna put some sweetener in your coffee, and you have an option between like honey or white table sugar, you definitely want to go with the honey, okay? Or if there's maple syrup, you could use that as well. The reality is that these are still better than plain old white table sugar. And there's diets out there like the paleo diet that uses this quite often. And when we look at these different sweeteners, I mean, it's ideal to use erythritol, xylitol, monk fruit, allulose, stevia. Those are ideal because they're not gonna raise your blood sugar at all. But if you're looking for more natural sources, those are still better than the awful, nasty white table sugar that most people consume 125 pounds of a year. Now, when we look at this whole list, there's two things you didn't see on it, right? That would be protein and fats. And the reason for that is because proteins and fats are pretty much negligible as to what they do to your glycemic index. As we look at following a low glycemic index diet, it's funny because most Western doctors will say, oh, it's too complicated. People can't do that. It's very complicated to follow this low glycemic index diet that's pulling all these foods out, okay? So let's think about this for a minute. If you can pretty much have fats, if you can have protein, and that's not gonna raise your blood sugar, and you can pretty much have all the different vegetables, like cruciferous vegetables, for instance, then you have a lot of foods that you can eat, and it's really not that complicated. Sure, it could be hard from a perspective of willpower or maybe even discipline, but from the perspective of possibility, in whether or not it's easy or not to do, it's very easy to fall into the low glycemic index range whenever you're choosing your foods. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you like this one, I think you'll really like this one over here next.